Hi there, this is Jim from Weird Nashville, inviting you once again to step inside the screening room, where this time we'll take a look at Star Trek, the animated series. Now, this animated series predates Star Trek Lower Decks by 50 years, but most of the general public has no idea it even existed. For many years, even the fans said it wasn't canon, meaning that they didn't really consider it true Star Trek. But all that changed in the 21st century. The year is 1969, and NBC has just issued the second and final cancellation of a series named Star Trek. Now, this series had been canceled the year before, and a massive letter writing campaign changed NBC's mind, and they brought it back for a third season. But it didn't last beyond that. For many years afterwards, it was believed that the only reason for this cancellation was poor ratings of the series. But as the years would pass, it became much more widely understood that it was more directly a result of a souring relationship between Gene Roddenberry and the network. Herb Solow, an executive producer for Paramount, immediately began offering the series in syndication throughout the country. Star Trek then began showing up daily in almost every major market, and its popularity skyrocketed. Star Trek was far more valuable to advertisers in syndication than it ever had been while in production. At the height of its popularity, it was airing in the United States 308 times a week on 134 US stations, whereas later it would then be translated into 47 languages and sold in syndication to 131 international markets. One thing was certain: no one could ever use ratings as an excuse for NBC's failure. So it became obvious to the network and to production officials alike at Paramount that there was still money in Star Trek, but how to pursue it without getting back in bed with Gene Roddenberry. The answer came from Filmation, an animation powerhouse in television that had been making children's programming since 1960. When the famous letter writing campaign that saved Star Trek after its first cancellation went public, it caught Filmation's attention, and they approached Paramount while Star Trek was still in its final season. They wanted to do a Saturday morning show based on the series. The idea would be that this series would be about young people in training on a ship named the Excalibur. Ironically, this Starfleet Academy kind of approach would show up again and again throughout the history of Star Trek, but would never be realized. Filmation tried unsuccessfully to get the deal together with Paramount and Roddenberry. It simply wasn't going to be. The relationship between Paramount and Roddenberry was so severely strained, and NBC wanted no part of this. And remember, they were just in the process of canceling the show. But Star Trek's syndication performance changed all of that. Paramount and NBC were 100% behind going forward with the cartoon series because from their perspective, it would give them a revenue stream without actually having to deal with Roddenberry, since the animation would be done by Filmation. As far as Paramount and NBC were concerned, this was free money. But Roddenberry wasn't an idiot. He now knew he had a lot of leverage going into this negotiation, and negotiate he did. By the time he was done, he had been guaranteed 2 full seasons, 22 episodes, full creative control, and a budget of $75,000 an episode, which at the time was the most ever spent on a cartoon. He also won the concession that he would only do true Star Trek, no kiddie Trek. So the whole Starfleet Academy thing would go away. Well, maybe not completely. The concept would end up on a Filmation live-action show later entitled Space Academy. On September 8, 1973, exactly 7 years to the day after the series premiered on NBC, Star Trek was back. Today it is widely referred to as Star Trek the Animated Series, but back then, it was simply Star Trek. Roddenberry was adamant that the show was Star Trek. It was not a kiddie show. It was a continuation of the original series, which is why he used the same title. The addition of the animated series to the title was not done until years later. The series, which lasted 2 years, could be viewed as the completion of the Enterprise's 5-year mission. D.C. Fontana personally viewed the 22 episodes as being year 4. StarTrek.com today refers to both seasons as year 4 and 5. Almost immediately, it sold into 25 major markets and was branded a success. Okay, we need to really talk about two people before we go too much further with Star Trek the Animated Series. The first is Dorothy C. Fontana. Dorothy Fontana met Gene Roddenberry in 1961 when she was filling in for his secretary while working on the TV series The Lieutenant. Roddenberry encouraged her writing, and she soon adopted the name of D.C. Fontana because no one could tell that it was a woman from the name alone. And let's face it, women were pretty heavily prejudiced against at that time in Hollywood. She worked as a story editor for him on the original Star Trek series, but when the animated series came up, he gave her a job as associate producer. She basically was responsible for all the creative scripts, the angles, the stories, things of that nature, the relationship with the writers. The relationship between her and Gene continued for several decades until she parted ways with Roddenberry during her tenure with Star Trek The Next Generation. Additionally, many people have wondered why the original Star Trek theme song disappeared. Well, the idea is that Filmation always produced its own music. That way it didn't have to pay royalties to other people. So the Star Trek theme for the animated series was actually written by the legendary jazz musician Ray Ellis. But because of contractual reasons, he had to use a pen name. So he created Yvette Blaze as his pen name. He also gave co-credit to another person whose name was created by using the names of his two children, Jeff, Michael. Now, as we watch the portraits up there show you what the cast is going to be in the TV series, let's talk a little bit about the cast. We obviously expected we were going to get William Shatner back and Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelly, Jimmy Doohan, Majel Barrett, but the original idea was not to bring George Takei Sulu or Nichelle Nichols back as Uhura. The fact was, the budget was tight, even at $75,000 an episode, and they didn't really want to spend the money on it. So when they got everybody together for the first time, Leonard looked around and said, well, where's George and Nichelle? And when it was explained to them that the budget had precluded them from being included in the cast, he very calmly told them, no George and Nichelle, no Leonard. When the cast reconvened about a month later to record the very first episode, George and Nichelle were on the set. Now, Doohan and Barrett were both accomplished voice actors, so they were given the jobs of doing all the other voices for the show so that nobody had to pay guest stars unless it was absolutely imperative that it had to be done. So Jimmy was quoted later on in the 50-Year Mission as saying, it was kind of fun doing it because I did 3 characters, and in 10 of them I did 4. And I always pushed for that because once you did more than 3, they had to double your pay. Strangely enough, though, I never used any accents. I just changed my tone for my voice. And 2 other last minute changes. McCoy had been promoted to commander, and Nurse Chapel was now a lieutenant. Unfortunately, the budget did prevent them from bringing in Walter Koenig again as Chekhov, so he was unable to provide that voice, and the character simply wasn't included. They were, however, able to bring in 2 new bridge officers, Lieutenant Rex and Lieutenant Maress, both aliens, both non-humanoids. Koenig, while he couldn't play Chekhov, was asked to go ahead and write an episode. And he did, The Infinite Vulcan, in season 2. But he experienced what was probably the single biggest problem with writing animated Star Trek. Up to this point, Star Trek was a classic 4-act story, and you had 52 minutes to set up, advance, and conclude your story. On the animated series, you had to do all 3 in only 22 minutes. This generally meant no time for secondary subplots and very few background or establishing scenes. The fact that the show had so many classic episodes was a testimony to the quality of the writers that were still writing Star Trek. In fact, the 4 episodes of the TV series that you see up here on the screen are considered the best run out of the 22. Even more so, the first one, Yesteryear, is actually considered by many fans to be one of the very best episodes of Star Trek in any format to date. They also managed to establish a couple Star Trek firsts. The first appearance of a holodeck, called a rec deck at that particular point. The introduction of Captain April as the first captain of the Enterprise before Christopher Pike. And a life support belt that generated a force field around crew members so they didn't have to use bulky spacesuits. While that seemed like a neat idea in the cartoons, it was never carried forward in any other show of Star Trek, probably due to the fact that people could never really accept that it was a viable product because how would a portable force field provide you with oxygen? And being animated meant that they didn't have to make all the aliens a man in a suit, 2 arms, 2 legs, etc. So a great many new aliens were introduced in the series, including the Kzinti, who are already subjects of novelizations by Larry Niven. However, the pink color of the Kzinti spacesuits brings up a recurring odyssey in the animated series. The color pink shows up everywhere. We had pink uniforms for Klingons. We had pink uniforms for Kzinti. We had pink starships. We had pink aliens. We had pink skies. We had pink tribbles. Everything was pink. What was unknown to most of the production staff at that time? Director Sutherland was colorblind, so to him, pink was light gray. However, Irv Kaplan made all the color choices, and the only man who could have second-guessed him was, you guessed it, Hal. He had no idea that pink was everywhere. Now, over the years, there have been a series of marketing tie-ins to the cartoon, but maybe not as many as you would see for other Star Trek series. We saw crossovers between Transformers and the cartoon. We've seen Hallmark Christmas ornaments. You got the obligatory trading cards. Nestle did a candy bar. But probably the most unique thing for the animation was that you could purchase honest-to-God cells from Paramount, the acetate sheets that were used to make the series and had characters drawn on them. So I want to call attention to 2 things a lot of people may not have caught. One, in the current series, Star Trek Lower Decks, the characters and a scene from Star Trek, the animated series, actually show up on a pad in the show. So I guess that settles the is it canon or not question. And the second thing is that the series earned Star Trek its very first Emmy for the Best Children's Series from 1974 to 1975 season. Now, although the series had been nominated many times prior to that, it had never won. And it was the first in a series of Emmys that would continue to be won over the following decades. Okay, and the last thing I want to point out is that there was a public service announcement created during the cartoon's original run on behalf of the Keep America Beautiful program. In the mid-1970s, the United States was struggling with an anti-litter campaign, and this Keep America Beautiful program was fairly substantial and had a big presence on TV. So it was kind of nice that they actually asked Star Trek to do a little, 15-second promo, which you're seeing here on the screen. This aired not during necessarily Star Trek. It could actually air during other programming as well. And it's the only one that I'm aware of, and the quality, of course, is not all that hot because it had been recorded by VHS, but we're lucky to still have it today. So once again, we've come to the end of one of our retrospectives here in the screening room. I want to thank you for the time that you've spent with us this week. Please be sure to like us, subscribe to us, and click the notify button so that you'll know when we have new episodes that are released.